Hey guys, Matteo here, welcome back to a new video, and today I want to go through my latest side-by-side video, the one between the Sony FX30 and the Pocket 6K. I want to basically go scene by scene, tell you where do I see the difference and what I prefer in what kind of situation and why. And of course the first video that I released went through YouTube compression, and I know that even this video is going to be watched through YouTube, but this time I'm gonna leave the link in the description where you can download the master file of the side-by-side in 4K ProRes. If you have a Mac, do not open it in QuickTime, but if you want to see the true colors and what I see in DaVinci, open it in VLC. Now, just a couple of things. Yeah, you guys know I'm a big Blackmagic fan and I love the brand and I love the cameras, but you also know that I'm very honest. Blackmagic never pay me to say anything. When the 6K Pro came out, I returned it after a week and I told you why I didn't like it, probably with the ND filters and all this kind of stuff. So one thing, guys, to keep in mind is that doesn't really matter if the Pocket looks better or the Sony looks better. What really matters is what you do. So you don't really pick a camera because a YouTuber or a person tell you that's better. You have to pick up a camera based on what you do. So in my case, I'm a cinematographer and I made of the film look, of the cinematic quality, my kind of footprint, and is what I really care about is that quality and the dynamic range and all this kind of stuff, which for some people that maybe shoots a van, this mean absolutely nothing. But this is just my case, and as a cinematographer, and everybody can agree on this, Blackmagic is still the top of the list. But now, guys, let's just jump into the side-by-side, and we start from this first image. Of course, you already know Cam A is the Pocket 6K, Cam B is Sony. Now, right off the bat, you're gonna see that Sony colors are a little bit more saturated, and some people might like it better on the Sony. Blackmagic has those more muted greens, muted blue, muted colors where it resemble a little bit more like the film look. Other than that, I have to say Sony did amazing step forward. I think they improved their color science, especially in the skin tones, quite a bit. This is something that I'm very pleased to see on Sony cameras. They finally are getting there. So this is a pretty challenging dynamic range test for this sensor. Of course, you have the sun hitting the white houses in the back. We don't have much light inside. So here is really where we're pushing the sensor, we're pushing the footage. And I'm pleased to say that even the Sony is doing a pretty good job. What I can tell you in terms of highlights, retention, and roll off, I mean, it's pretty easy to see that on the Pocket is very, very smooth. On the Sony, it was a little bit easier to clip. So as soon as I was opening up a little bit the aperture, I could tell that it was like those highlights were gone. As you can see, there's quite a bit harsher on the Sony compared to the Pocket. Nothing crazy. Again, I think Sony is doing a pretty good job. But again, we're competing against the Pocket 6K, which is one of the best roll-off I ever seen. One more thing, here where there is the red frame, there's clearly way more noise in the Sony, and also a little bit here where there's the shadows of the air. Her face is not as clean as the Pocket 6K. I see a lot of like artifacts in the shadows happening in the Sony footage. The H.264 at some point, they're gonna fall apart. And here is holding up pretty well. Of course it's 10-bit, of course it's 422, but the container, the codec is not as good as B-RAW or ProRes. So a lot of people comment that, you know, the Pocket 6K is sharper, and I said many times, right, it's so sharp. But this is not a bad sharpness. This is not an over sharp look. This is not something digital happening inside the camera. This is just naturally sharper because of the 6K sensor, and I think it looks fantastic. It's natural that we're gonna have a softer image when it comes to Sony and a sharper image when it comes to the Pocket 6K, because of course we're talking about 6K versus 4K. Overall, I like both. I have to be honest. I prefer the roll-off in the highlights on the Pocket, and the shadows are much cleaner on the Pocket 6K compared to the Sony. So let's just jump to the next one. Here, guys, the light, of course, moved, so it was a little bit different, but I think we kind of see the same thing, a little bit more saturated blue sky here. We see definitely a little bit more noise again against the frame where these shadows right here, and also where the face is, right here, just like before. Overall though, Sony looks pretty good. I mean, great dynamic range, is holding up those highlights pretty well. Again, great skin tones. I like what Sony is doing. Unfortunately, once we push the image in this high dynamic range scene, especially in these dark areas right here, and you see it here, it's much cleaner on the pocket. Now, moving on, guys, these are the rolling shutter frames. I think it's equally bad. I don't think the Sony is worse or the Pocket is worse. I think they're pretty bad. But again, guys, unless you're doing some crazy pan during your line of work, I wouldn't get influenced by picking up this camera, either the Pocket or the Sony, based exclusively on this rolling shutter. Now, next shot, this is actually quite interesting because it's basically, you can see the same thing that I told you for the first two shots, but you can see them a little bit more. And also, when the sun comes out, you can tell it's definitely smoother roll off on the Pocket. It's a little bit harsher. You can see it here on the Sony. Nothing crazy. I mean, Sony's still doing an amazing job and is retaining the highlights pretty well, in my opinion. What I'm not a fan of is, now you can see it here pretty well. Look how noisy it is, this part of the face. There is a tad of noise on the Pocket, but it's not nearly as bad as the Sony. This would be a problem for me, for my shooting style of shooting backlit pretty much all the time. So that's why I wanted to do this angle and this scene, because this is something that I might find myself often in this kind of scenario. I think the other one, they were kind of keeping up. I think here there's just no comparison. Moving on, this is probably the frame that I think they look closest, in my opinion. Amazing job on both camera here. So I really like the Sony. Beautiful skin tone, beautiful color. One thing, again, I'm noticing, if you check out the top part of the frame right here, where there's the blind, the white here are gone on the Sony. So this is just pure white. We're here in the Pocket, we still have a sort of like gray. So here the roll off, much smoother. So in a normally lit situation like this one, pretty basic, nothing crazy. Sony does a pretty good job actually, so I kind of like it. Now moving on, and the reason why I did this clip here, you know, most of the time we find ourselves, guys, in this tricky situation. The dream is always to shoot a sunset or sunrise, but we can't, so we have to use the entire day. And I remember from the time of the 5D Mark II, didn't really matter what I did. When I was shooting in a park or in a forest, whatever, in the middle of the day, it looked like crap. And I think where Blackmagic really shine is actually in this kind of situation, because it's easy to capture a great sunset or sunrise, right? Even with your phone, it could look pretty decent. But shooting in the middle of the day, in a park, in winter, and here, I think you can tell which is which. The green on the Pocket, of course, are muted. As you can see on the left side, the green here on the bottom, they're much less green. Of course, this is something you can correct with an extra node, and you can desaturate the green and make it look more interesting. But the Pocket just naturally gives you that more desaturated image that helps you quite a bit when it comes to greens and this kind of situation, which are very tricky. This one, guys, pretty much same thing. You can see the green here pretty clearly, way more saturated on the Sony. Overall, great skin tones on the Sony, great highlight retention on the Sony. In the shadows, it still struggle a little bit, but I have to say outside is definitely easier because there's more light. So once you lit up this area in the shadows, it doesn't get as noisy as inside. And then maybe here in the Sony, the highlights roll off here looks a little bit better. Now another one here, shot on the sea. Here we moved on the beach, sun started going down. What I noticed immediately is a little bit the difference in the sea. It's a little bit more blue on the Pocket, but again, these guys are things that you can fix quite easily. In terms of image, I think when I see the subject down here, the girl and these guys here, they look a little bit soft on the Sony, where on the Pocket, even down here, we have a crazy amount of details. There's probably a little bit more details when the wave crash. I think that has to do with the H.264 versus B-RAW, because of course H.264 is gonna lose those details a little bit. But overall, guys, I have to say they match quite well. Now here, I kind of push it a little bit. I think this was a really good test to check out the dynamic range on the Pocket and on the Sony. So shot at f11, ISO 800, pretty much the same settings on both cameras. You can tell that the roll-off is a little bit better on the Pocket. These guys, even to my naked eye, I saw white. So I think it's normal to clip those highlights a little bit. There's not much we can do. I think I remember on the Pocket, we were on the yellowish, on the false color, where on the Sony, we were on the red, like completely clipped. You can especially tell it from this area right here. So as you can see here, there's plenty of details, right, in the ocean. But right here, this circle here is pure white, where on the Pocket, you don't have that white spot. So you still have the same amount of detail, pretty much equally distributed all over this area of reflection, which is great. Another thing, in the shadow, the people here, in my opinion, they're a little bit sharper, a little bit cleaner on the Pocket 6K. There's a thing, like, it's not even about noise, but what's really crazy is like how sharp these parts of the frame, these parts of the shadows are on the Pocket. Moving on, this one, guys, was shot at 50p. Pretty surprising for Sony, because at 50p I wasn't expecting much, to be honest, because Sony usually struggle when you start going up in the frame rate. But I have to say, this 4K at 50p looks pretty good. Actually, here there was a window from a building on the left that was bouncing some light, so we can have a natural reflection. You can tell there's a decent noise level actually in the shadows here. There's still more noise than on the Pocket, but it's actually much better than what I expected to be. So I still think the Pocket 6K is a little bit cleaner. In terms of skin tones, we're very close. I mean, it's not that, I think there's a little bit more magenta in the Sony, but nothing too crazy. Actually, quite good looking image on both cameras, especially being at 50p on the Sony. That's quite surprising. This one, another one, which we had the natural reflection right here. I actually really like this image. To me, looking, especially these two images, here is where I can see why I love the Blackmagic color science quite a lot. I don't know why, just this image scream Blackmagic Pocket on the left. Sony's, don't get me wrong, it's a fantastic image. But again, it's more a feeling that I have when I see Blackmagic footage compared to Sony footage, which in general, overall, I think it looks just a little bit too digital for my taste. This doesn't mean that, oh, I'm gonna get a Pocket because it looks like film. Because most of the people that buy Sony, they don't give a crap about the film look. They need something that looks good. Some people might like the digital look even better, and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, moving on, this is one of the last shots, but here you can clearly tell the roll-off we were talking about, because you can see from the sun, where on the Sony is quite a little bit like a white spot, kind of blown up a little, where on the Pocket, it just diffuses a little bit more gradually. Also, there's a lot of saturation in the yellow, I think, and if I have to be honest, the color were more on the red orange, which is something that I noticed even on the log. Actually, it was like that. The face here on the Pocket, much cleaner. On the Sony is good, it's okay, but there's some weird artifacts and noise going on, I think, here, so it just kind of falling apart again. To be honest, it's pretty decent, it's pretty usable. Again, I like to test the camera in this kind of scenario because this is something that I might actually shoot on a project. As you see in my videos, I shoot a lot of silhouette, a lot of against the sun, again, a lot of backlit stuff. So that's why I decided even to do this kind of shot. We can also see right here. So sorry for the focus here, guys, because on the Sony it's extremely hard to get the focus even with an external monitor because the focus peaking doesn't work too good. But here we can see, okay, here we were at f5.6, so the sun is looking a little bit better actually on the Sony here. Also, I think there's quite a bit of noise on the Pocket here as well, but remember guys, ISO 800, underexposed areas on the Pocket, it gets noisy. And as you may have noticed, we are going into the darkness, and the more we go into this tricky high contrast, low light, the more difference I see between the Pocket and the Sony, where in the studio will be way similar. In the park, I can maybe confuse one camera for another one maybe. While here, it's much easier for me to tell why the Pocket is better. And now we jump to the low light. ISO 800 on the Pocket, you guys know, is gonna be bad at night. It's actually flickering, so crazy noise at ISO 800. I knew it. I never shoot ISO 800 at night with the Pocket. I usually stick to 400 or 1250. Let's put them side by side, and we're gonna see that the Sony here, in terms of noise, much cleaner. I have to say much cleaner in the back, because on the face, especially this part right here, the Pocket 6K is still cleaner. Overall, two incredible images. When we switch to 1250, as you can see here, Pocket 6K, the noise is completely gone. So this is the beauty of having dual native ISO on the Pocket. We go from 1000 to 1250, it resets, change circuits, and at 1250, there's actually zero noise, where there is quite a little bit more noise on the Sony. As you can tell here, you see this part of the frame where it's actually underexposed because there's no lights coming through. The Sony is like, again, falling apart. The noise is bigger than at ISO 800, so something to keep in mind, guys. You're gonna have a little bit harsher roll off, because at 1250 the roll off on the highlights is pretty bad. I don't know about a Sony, but it looks much better, so this is something to keep in mind on the Pocket. And then we jump to 3200, which is the native, technically, ISO on the Pocket, even though I think 1250 is cleaner than the 3200. And of course here I brought down the mids, the shadows, the highlights to keep the image perfectly exposed on both cameras. So 3200 on the Pocket. 3200 on the Sony is actually pretty decent. It seems much better than the 1250. And even in this part of the face, it's finally, there's not a lot of noise going on. I'm assuming there's some sort of denoiser that kicks in, which is the same thing that happened, I think, on the FX3 A7S3 at 12,800 ISO. Anyway, pretty clean, actually. Very good looking image on the Sony. So if you're shooting at night on the Sony, definitely leave the 800, leave the 1250, jump to 3200. Quite fantastic. It's pretty good on the Pocket as well, but I'm actually pretty surprised with how clean is the Sony, especially on this side of the face. And here you have it, guys. So my final thoughts very quickly. I think the Pocket 6K does a better job in terms of highlights roll off and retaining cleaner shadows, especially when we are in this crazy high contrast, high dynamic range situation. Through the YouTube compression or on Instagram Reels, or you might not gonna see this difference. That's why I decided to upload the master file, because I want people to open up the big file and see for themselves what I mean. Sony does a fantastic job. It's a pretty cool camera that is gonna be useful for a lot of people, for a lot of work. Definitely improve the skin tones, definitely improve the highlights roll off, even if it's not as good as the Pocket, but it did a great job. I wish they would improve this codec. And I know people that buy Sony, they buy it because they can keep the file size very small. But I would love that Sony would give us the option at least to have ProRes, offering only H.264 files in 2023 for $2,000, 2,000 euros, actually 2,300 euros, something like that. It's not good enough, and I wish they could offer us a better codec. You know, it doesn't really work for my shooting style. Another thing that I love more about the Pocket is that fantastic menu and that big screen that you have on board. So you don't need any external monitor, especially with the new 6K G2 and the 6K Pro. The focus peaking works much better, and you have false color on board without the need to use an external monitor. Other than that, guys, let me know what you think in the comments after you saw the master file, which I think is the main thing. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you in the next one.